podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, one of the world's leading international professional bodies which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm Helen O'Grady, a master executive coach and coach supervisor and your host for this in-depth series on coaching supervision. Each episode delves into a distinctive aspect of supervision with leading practitioners and thought leaders in the field, uncovering the nuanced ways supervision enhances coaching practice, supports well-being and drives professional growth. Whether you're a seasoned supervisor, a coach curious about supervision, or simply interested in the dynamics of reflective practice, this series offers illuminating conversations that will transform how you think about coaching excellence. So, welcome, Katie Friedman. What a joy to have you discussing coaching supervision. And I could say who you are because we do know each other, but actually it would be much nicer to hear from you who you are.
Who am I? All right, I'm going to use my favourite Ditzler model. So who I pretend to be, Helen, is an expert who is experienced and professional. Who I'm really scared I am is someone who doesn't know enough, isn't enough, blah, blah, blah. And I guess who I really am is somebody with spiky strengths and fairly significant executive function challenges, and also challenges with time and other things with different life experiences. I came from education background, trained as a coach. I am perimenopausal. I have 3 children who are neurodivergent. I am an ADHD. And then in the mix, I seem to have picked up credentials that people might be interested in. So I will list them because they are who I really am. I'm a co-founder of Goldmind. I'm an ADHD coach, coach trainer, speaker, and I'm training to be a supervisor. So I'm going to say that in all honesty, I'm not pretending I'm there yet. I'm in the middle of it.
But you're a coach and a coach trainer, and I know that you value supervision, hence why you're training, you know, and that's lots of us, isn't it? It's supervision is relevant whether we're coaches or coach supervisors, and lots of our audience members won't necessarily be supervisors, but are interested in supervision and what it can offer them. So great. Welcome. Thanks for agreeing to be on this, and it's a joy to have you. Could you start, because the language is complex, isn't it? So it seems in a way trite to ask you to define neurodiversity, but I guess from your perspective, what are the important definitions and what feels important in relation to coaching and coach supervision?
Okay, so firstly, neurodiversity is everybody. And the idea is that some of us are wired differently. I think if we were to talk about what does neurodivergent mean, as opposed to neurodiverse, which is everyone, I would say it's basically the difference between having a spiky profile where the distance between your strengths and your challenges is just more significant. It's not about whether it's in relation to average. It's literally the top of my strength and the bottom of my challenge is just further apart than someone who fits more of a norm, okay, which some people call neurotypical. It's all on a bit of a spectrum, but if you fit more of a norm, you might be wavy. So you've got strengths and challenges. They're just not so far apart.
And when you say profile, how would you define profile?
Yeah, I mean, you could start by talking about a cognitive profile. And if I were to give you mine, because that seems like the cleanest thing, I could give you some examples. If 100 is average, setting myself up here, I love talking, Helen. And that's good, isn't it?
We're in the right space.
My verbal skills are like 130, but my memory processing speed is more like 89. So 130 to 89 is quite a big, spiky profile, just to give that as an example.
I know there are other reasons, because that's the cognitive. Is there any other profiles that are relevant? And if they're not, that's okay.
Absolutely. So sensory processing, sensory differences, it's essentially how we walk in the world. It can be very different. I think the other thing to say, though, is when we think about neurodivergence, I think one of the things that's hard for both a neurodivergent thinker to hold sometimes and somebody who isn't, who's trying to provide that coaching space, it's not just that I'm different and that I'm presenting as different, or I'm telling you I've got ADHD, for example. I'm also coming with, I haven't known. So it's the fact that I've gone decades of my life, a lot of the time, without knowing about how I'm different. So I have been in quite a disempowered place, and I may have all kinds of stories woven in as to understand myself or not, that need a lot of unlearning and unpacking and a new lens. And that work takes time. And it's not, a few scrolls on TikTok or a million books, actually. Like, that's a start, but it really does need quite a lot of work to really unpack. And I think a lot of the time when we're serving people who are discovering or wondering or tell you that they have, it's also about, and how much work have they done on the integration of self? Because that piece is huge.
So integration, and for our listeners, you put your hands together, to really demonstrate that difference in terms of making sense of it for themselves as the work.
Yeah. If you think about coaching as self-actualization in some way, right? And a lot of us know about the messy middle, which is where we're looking at how do you validate self? How do you love and connect to yourself? Okay. A lot of us have been trying to do that for ages. We've been trying to self-actualize. We've been trying to love ourselves. We get told that we've got to be kind to ourselves, or we've got to connect or pause, or this mindfulness. And yet at the base is understanding of self, right? If you do not have any kind of roadmap as to how you're different, then all of this attempt to do the messy middle and the self-actualization at the top of the pyramid is wobbling all the time in a whole world of uncertainty. And what the expert work is, and the integrative work, is about building back the certainty and then relearning all this messy middle and doing self-actualization.
Which makes me think about that distinction, which is not necessarily helpful, but is relatable probably for coaches, around kind of transactional coaching and transformational coaching, which is really about stories, assumptions, beliefs that we're holding about ourselves and shifting them for long-lasting change, rather than just the transactional, what's the behavior or what's the actual thing that I want to be doing.
Absolutely. And as well as the transformational, a lot of the time we are reliant on various schools of psychology, right? And some of those, well, almost all of them, are not taking into account the neurodivergent lens. And that's the thing that also needs integrating. You can't just talk about my parents or, my figures from the past or where it came from, or even in transactional analysis, we have to superimpose a neurodivergent lens, and it's really complex.
Sounds very complex. And for any listeners who aren't aware of transactional analysis, that's the parent-child-adult relationship, and you can go and find lots out about it, but we won't dig into that, but just in case anybody wasn't sure what you were talking about there. And that probably leads to what you might describe as the common misconceptions, and that feels like a very kind of reductive question, so apologies, but what do you think are the most common misconceptions around neurodivergent coaches or neurodivergent thinkers, clients that we might be working with?
I'm going to link it to something I forgot to say in the last one, actually, which is, so one of the common misconceptions is, we're all a little bit X, we're all a little bit ADHD. And funnily enough, in coaching, you might feel that way. You might be seeing it everywhere. You might have children, you might have friends, you might have exceedingly more clients coming through the door or whatever. And I would say that that's interesting. The stat is that neurodivergence is about 1 in 5 of the general population, of all the different co-occurrences. However, I think if you take coaching or anything that's to do with psychology, you're going to be attracting more. Why? Because we're interested in how the brain works and how people work, because we're constantly trying to figure out, how do we work in this world where we're different? There's actually statistics, which I'm not able to quote because I've got no memory, as I've just outed myself. But certainly around psychology, there's some statistic about how it attracts more autistic thinkers, because it is so very interesting around how to understand people. So I think that that's often true. Or we might be working in an industry which has a much higher amount of neurodivergent thinkers. And so it's quite easy to suddenly go, we all are. Who cares? It doesn't matter. And then sort of almost try to quash the differences. I think that's an important one.
Can I add in? Because I wonder and see whether you agree with this. But as you were saying there, I was thinking, because there's also that notion of coaching can coach anybody and we just work with the person in front of us. And I wonder whether that's the sort of a similar misconception of, well, it doesn't really matter because we coach anybody sort of thing, or is that something different, do you think?
I think that's a really good one. I want to come on to that because I think that is a misconception. I'll talk about that later, but no, it's okay. That one I think is about positionality.
Yeah.
And it's really, really important, right? So yes, you can coach anyone, but it depends where your client is at. So if I'm coaching somebody who's racialized as Black and brown, who is navigating a workplace, who has a certain level of consciousness around their own identity and what's going on, it may become very clear that I am not the coach, even if I've done a lot of anti-racist work, because they need somebody who really understands the experience in the first person. And that then becomes not me. And I think that we all have a responsibility to do the work to mitigate power differentials all the time. It's all over the ICF ethics, I'm really pleased to say, and hasn't been ripped out because of Trump. I work under the ICF Code of Ethics. I think that that's really, really important. Yeah, I think this assumption that you can coach anyone is really lacking in humility. It's like, I don't see colour, or we're all the same and you're just human. And what that does to my difference is you just erase me right there. It's not respectful. It does the opposite. It's often a rescue, back to transactional analysis. We're doing it because it works for my fragility, if I say that. It makes me feel more comfortable if we're just human. But of course, it's like me saying, Helen, it's a safe space.
Yes.
Is it? You experience safety differently to me, and I'm not here to tell you whether it's a safe space. You have to experience it, right? And we have to work hard.
I have the same bugbear with, it's a non-judgmental space. No,
Yeah.
it's not.
Well,
hopefully we'll try and work to that and see and be curious about it. But actually, our brains are such that we are going to make judgments.
Right. But it's also practice, isn't it?
For sure.
Psychological safety and how you create that space is a practice, just like allyship is a practice. And the work to make something inclusive is a practice. It's not what you say, it's how you are and the work that you're doing behind the scenes. I think another thing that's a big misconception, unfortunately, we just have to out, is that we've all grown up in a world that is incredibly ableist. And essentially what ableism means is that if we have any kind of difference or disability, that the disability means deficient or less than. And so when we hear I've got ADHD or I'm autistic or I'm dyslexic, it's the kind of, oh, less than. And whilst we might not consciously feel this or say this or think that any of this is coming out, we are labouring under this because these are the things we have to unlearn. And that can be really difficult. You've been in training with me where we've done this, and it comes out in things like when you might be in supervision and your client will talk about having to deal with, I've got to deal with this client. And already we're in this language of, we're not in a partnership here, are we? Because you're seeing something as problematic because it's a difference and it's therefore a deficit. That stuff needs work.
What I noticed as you were talking about neurodivergent clients, often, as you say, they've grown up in an ableist society. So their internal language is still, so we then might end up colluding with, I've got to deal with this, or I've got to overcome, or that's what I notice as well with some of the clients I work with.
I think there's another couple of assumptions. Sorry, I've got a lot here, misconceptions.
Great. No.
So another one is the assumption that I myself am not. So you've brought it to me that you are neurodivergent, and I'm assuming that I'm not. And my question is always, and how do you know? How much work have you done? Because usually the story is because I don't look like my daughter, or I'm not like my friend's son, or whatever. There's one mental model and I don't fit it and therefore I can't be. Or another classic one is I don't suffer enough, so I can't possibly be that. So I think that's another one. And I'm not therefore diagnosing everybody, Helen. I just think it's something we need to hold lightly.
Yes.
And a neurodivergent person will know faster than you. Right? They will pick it up.
In you, do you mean, or in themselves?
Yeah. They'll start to pick it up in everyone else.
What else?
Yeah. They'll get the vibe. It's like a spidey sense once they start to integrate the work. They start with everyone is different to me, and then it becomes I can see it everywhere.
Okay.
So that's quite interesting. And the other one is, this is a big one. If it's relevant to the client will bring it up. Or if it's relevant to my supervisee, they will bring it up. No, they won't. Not if you don't invite it, not if you don't continue to invite it, because they are navigating safety. And so if they don't feel safe to bring it up, or they feel your fragility because you don't know anything about it, they're not going to bring it up. They will compartmentalize and go, Helen doesn't know anything about neurodiversity, so I'll have to go and talk to so-and-so about that, if at all. Or they can't hold it. They can't hold me, and they can't cope with that bit.
And that makes me think of, as you say, other aspects of identity, social graces,
right.
And that link to, as you were saying earlier, about psychological safety.
Right.
Actually, we have to invite it. We can't just assume that somebody feels comfortable, particularly when there's difference, whether that's colour of skin, education, or spiky profiles.
Yeah, exactly that. And, neurodivergence, this is another really important thing, is not a white thing, right? It's not a middle class thing. And we really have to make sure that we understand that intersecting throughout all the spiky profiles are people racialized as black and brown, are people who are non-binary, are people from the LGBTQ plus movement. And we really have to hold that intersectionality. If they're finally finding out about how their brain works, they don't want to be parking other things that they know at the door.
Yeah. And so that possibly links to almost impossible question I'm going to ask you, but I'm not expecting you to do the whole thing. But for people who are wanting and thinking about creating more inclusive spaces, both as coaches and as supervisors and supporting coaches to do that, I guess, where do they even start?
Well, I am biased and I'm going to plug my training.
Good.
You know that, Helen. We get supervisors and we get allies. So we get people who think they might be neurodivergent, and we get people who don't think they're neurodivergent at all, but want to learn more. And what I think is wonderful about certainly the first 2 modules of our training, and I say 2 because then it's learning to be a coach, and you may not have any interest in that, learning to be a specialist coach. So the first module that we do, it's a neurodivergent lens. It's very much centered on ADHD, but it's easy to adjust to different co-occurrences, because that's the other thing. That's another misconception. If someone says they've got ADHD, it's often very more likely to be more than one thing, right? A smattering of this, a little bit of that, and not just one thing. So we center on that. But if you are not identifying as ADHD yourself, or neurodivergent yourself, you will be in a minority, but you will be surrounded by people who are on this journey, who are figuring themselves out. And I think that is an amazing experience to be in and amongst, to feel like you're a minority, but also that you're very much included and welcomed, and to be able to learn and experience in a very neuro-affirming, inclusive space, as much as we build and create that. And we go through the executive functions, but we're very process driven. So you're really learning from people's examples as well as from the tools and the material. I think that is the sort of work we're talking about, where you find people with lived experience and expertise to learn from, outside of going, oh, you're racialized as black and brown. Oh, tell me more about that. Like to your client who's paying you. Not okay. So the work needs to happen outside of, obviously we learn from our clients by osmosis, but we need to be doing that background work. And I've just given you an example. I know there are some brilliant coaches doing anti-racist work as well. And actually in this day and age, with identity being so important to people, I really think it's on us all to be working outside of our remits and our expertise and constantly reaching.
Yeah. And again, with my biased hat on, so you're talking about training and specialised training, which I think is incredibly important, but this is also, and why we're talking about it in relation to supervision. If coaches are like, oh, where am I at? Actually, possibly the first place to even start thinking about it is supervision, and then go and work out, well, what's the other work? As you say, I'm not remotely suggesting that all the work gets done in supervision,
yes,
but it is a place to talk about what's going on and what parts of your identity are you either noticing or feeling different from your clients, and then what do you want to do about it?
Yeah, I think supervision, in my experience, and obviously it's a fledgling experience at the moment, it's often an uncovering of your fragility, isn't it? And being able to pinpoint and be clear on, and then know what to do about it, and to feel galvanized rather than shamed, right? To do something different.
Yeah. And lots of the questions I'm asking, we could spend probably a whole episode talking about. But what is coming up for me in my supervision practice quite a bit, and in coaching as well, is disclosure. So clients either going through assessment themselves. I had somebody yesterday who had an assessment and was told she wasn't something, and so there was some identity processing around that. Or then coaches thinking like, oh, I think my client's got this, and slightly doing the diagnosis themselves, which is not great, but not really sure how to work in around all clients who are like, I've just been diagnosed, or this is where I'm at. I don't know whether disclosure is the right word, but working with that as both a supervisor and a coach. Any words of wisdom, Katie?
So I think there's two bits, isn't there? There's one, which is what you've mentioned about people who are going through assessment or are trying to gain assessment or gain access to, and then having a complete 360 if they get told something they're not expecting. Assessment's an interesting one. I have had experience of being assessed and it not being accurate. I think one of the things we do in ADHD coaching is trying to bring you back to yourself, and so that you are able to trust what you know. And I do think that's really, really important when navigating both the medical model, assessments, all of the stuff. We're very good at pedestaling everybody else because we've been told that we're not this. So we then assume everybody else has the wisdom that we don't have. And I think that can be really problematic. And also that precision health isn't quite there yet. So we may get told one thing, but we're still having separate diagnosis of ADHD and autism. Frankly, they should be together as a kind of holistic, and the rest, dyslexia, dyspraxia. And then all the physical co-occurrences, because there's massive interconnection with the physical. And, the medical model's still not putting the brain and the body together, which is infuriating. I'm going to move on from that before I dysregulate with the emotional burden of that. So disclosure, we're back to positionality. I really think this is important. Even when you're a highly trained specialist who has lived experience, there's something about owning your positionality. I have found myself sometimes coaching or supporting or mental coaching and now supervising people who are supporting people through disclosure. And I think we really have to be clear. I am now living in a bubble of self-employment. I don't have a boss. I don't have an organization. And I am a lot freer to say what I want on LinkedIn and the rest. This is a privilege. I'm holding a lot of privilege that somebody in an organization may not have. And so we really have to be careful about our in the moment decision making around our questions, etc., that our bias around our own privilege and our own positionality, and that could be our white privilege, our male privilege, etc., and what that means in terms of safety. I would say that we often find that people who are finding out get very excited about the finding out and the clarity. And then they desperately want, because we're hooked in a loop of everybody else validates me still, because we've been doing that for decades. We're then desperate for everybody else to know our differences and validate them. And actually part of the work is to unhook, Tara Moore's work on unhooking from praise and that kind of thing. It's similar. We need to unhook. We need to start learning how to validate ourselves, understand ourselves. And then I think it's a good place to be deciding whether to disclose. Now, again, some people don't have the privilege. They may not have the time, the privilege of time. Unfortunately, we get people who are in really tricky situations where the coaches come in because they're on an improvement plan. And I've had to refer people to neurodivergent lawyers, etc., because we're in a situation that is untenable, certainly for coaching.
I think there's something in there about boundaries, and that each individual coach and each individual supervisor said the boundaries of what are and how that intersects with our lived experience, our training, our in the moment, our experience of coaching or supervision, our professional experience, all of that. And so they're not fixed, are they, in terms of this is something that we can discuss in coaching, this isn't. But actually, as individual coaches and supervisors, again, we need to do the work and be thinking about, where is my boundaries? What am I actually offering? What am I colluding with? And when am I out of my depth? And actually, I need to be referring or working with somebody to think about what other support could they access if coaching or I'm not the right person.
Yeah, I really feel like that piece for a neurodivergent person where they are trying to figure out what their needs are in a workplace in order to express that need and self-advocate, that really feels like specialist remit to me, because we're talking about managing situational variability, the complexity of how they work in different modes, in different states, and then how to manage when they're under pressure, because this is what often happens. Here's a list of reasonable adjustments. Which one do you want? Well, now you've had your chance and that's the end of being asked. And the confidence to push back and to say, I am on a journey, I am evolving, and I will let you know when I know more. That takes time.
You need to be very emotionally regulated, don't you? In order to be able to think in that way.
Right. And empowered. And that takes time.
For sure. I suspect you've seen a change in the awareness of neurodivergence and how it's coming into coaching and supervision. What have you noticed and what do you think is going to happen? I mean, again, obviously you have the ability to see into the future, Katie, but where do you think it's going?
I went to the ADHD conference in Prague a couple of weeks ago, and it was really interesting because I went there 2 years ago and no one was talking about coaching. And that's why we've written the book, which we will talk about.
We will talk about.
But actually, I wasn't this time the only one talking about ADHD coaching. I think that the conversation is starting to turn to what kind of approach works for neurodivergent people. There's now actual research talking about how CBT practices cannot be very effective for autistic and ADHDers for a number of reasons, done in certain ways, and that actually they may be looking at encouraging masking, etc. I don't think there's any black and white, actually. I don't think there's you can or you can't. It's the how and how do you integrate with understanding. So what I think I'm learning, and I did make some really useful networking links with some psychiatrists, and one of them had ADHD, and their take was that this constant emphasis in the ADHD world on medication is going to have to change, because we're already at bottlenecks all over the country, yes. Waiting lists of 10 years in some places. We're going to have to shift away from disclosure, away from having to get the assessments, etc. And we're going to need to be working at source around improving inclusive organisations and understanding, particularly around leadership and understanding and managing difference. And I think strengths-based approaches. Another thing I would say, which, because a lot of the stuff I do, I think this works for everyone. It just works particularly importantly for spiky profiles. You've got the younger generation, can't afford to buy a house. They're not interested in this whole accumulative wealth. They're into the right now and the do I like to be here? And they really are just going to move and leave, and they will be able to because there aren't many of them, right? We're in the inverted pyramid of aging people. So I really think that the well-being and the improvement of the workplace is going to become a much bigger thing. And I think that coaching, particularly specialist coaching, is going to just grow and grow.
And so with that growth, what do you think the role is for coaching supervision in that space? And what do coach supervisors in particular need to be paying attention to or thinking about as their development?
Well, specialism. I really think that we need to be all doing a lot more around understanding of different experiences of what it is to be human in this world, from cultural perspectives, from different intersectional perspectives. I think the other thing that's going to be really important is access to coaching. And we're really lucky in the UK because we still have access to work. They're still funding coaching, specialist coaching. And I think the other thing that's going to be really important is accreditation and encouraging of best practice. So when I was at this conference, it was quite interesting. They looked at who accessed supervision and who accessed high-level training. And it was kind of scary. In the US, there was something like 50% of ADHD coaches were not formally qualified with accredited training. This is why we very much push ours, because it is. And then in Australia, they'd done things completely differently and they had a much higher percentage. And that then correlated with a much higher percentage of coaches who were accessing supervision, right? Now, in the US, supervision is a tricky thing because it doesn't really exist. They call it mental coaching. I think this is where the freedom to really, we are going to need a much bigger number of supervisors who really, really understand this kind of expertise.
And I think that's where the AC is different from the ICF, which is good, where they do put the focus on supervision is mandatory for coaches accredited with the AC.
Yeah.
But as you say, that moving into more specialist stuff, and I guess that's questions to ask of a supervisor. If you're a coach looking for supervision of actually what do you need and what are you asking of your supervisor to ensure that they can meet your needs and help you develop as a coach.
Yeah. And I think it will become increasingly important to say, what training have you had?
So let's talk about your book. It's so exciting. Congratulations, newly published author.
Oh, it's not out yet.
Hopefully by the time the podcast goes out, it might be out.
Yes, no, it might be out. It might be a week ago. It's called ADHD, Now What? That's a big title.
Now what?
ADHD, now what? And then it's got a little post-it note that says how ADHD coaching can help you thrive and get your power back. In fact, that's actually what it says. And so basically it's about ADHD coaching and its place. And it's really tailored to the person thinking, maybe I've got ADHD, or I'm knowing I've got ADHD. Just another thing I want to say about, you talked about people disclosing or finding out assessments. I think another thing in the future is we're going to have to move away from those. And where's your piece of paper? So we're really tailoring this book to, we're not waiting for you to know.
To get a diagnosis or something formal that says, if you identify with ADHD.
Yeah, then now what? Because I think part of the thing is people go, oh, right, that's me and that's it. Or I'm going to get some medication and that's it. And there's this whole bit of work that needs to be done on integrating and understanding self. So this is what the book talks about. And I think the benefits for this audience is obviously it's setting the scene in quite some detail for someone who doesn't know about ADHD, as well as those who do. It talks about the not knowing, the survival mode, because I think that's a really good way of really understanding what the shift is from survival to thriving and why people might be in survival. Because if we don't understand that as supervisors, it's really easy as coaches to chuck people out of practice and go, no, it's a therapist.
Yeah.
Right? Coach readiness or coachability. And actually, that can be really problematic, especially if you go, good luck out there finding a therapist. Do you know any neuroaffirmative ones or neurodivergent ones, even better?
And again, specialized in that,
exactly.
Specialized in that space.
Right. So if you don't know and you just tell people not that you can't do it, this is where having a network is also really on us to have a wider network of specialists so we know when to refer. Otherwise, it's not very ethical. So yeah, this is part of that. And it will talk about that. And then it talks about what is ADHD coaching. It really talks about how we blend different kind of approaches as well as the neurodivergent lens. So you can understand that more. And then there's this wonderful, we integrate lived experience throughout, but we have this whole chapter on the impact of ADHD coaching from those who've had ADHD coaching, which I think is wonderful. And then the last bit is literally, how do you get one?
Where to look on that. Again, the questions to ask and
the ethical,
the ethical stuff around actually anybody can call themselves an ADHD coach. Unfortunately, the same as anybody can call themselves a coach.
Exactly. So there's a big emphasis on what do you ask, what are the credentials, and are they in supervision? Do they have mental coaching? All of those things.
Brilliant. Sounds amazing. I am looking forward to diving in. Sounds wonderful. So as we come to the end, Katie, again, a tricky question, but what would be the most important thing that you want our listeners to take away from our conversation today, do you think?
I think I'm still coming back to this idea of the knowing and the not knowing. I think that's the bit that never really gets spoken about. And that's why I wrote that book. It was like, okay, you could put people on medication, but we're not really managing this whole self business. And that needs to be held with such care. If someone just is finding this out, it has implications not only for your life moving forward, but how you integrate your past, how you understand yourself, and where you've come from and what you're doing. It means how you understand your family, because of course it runs through families. It's huge. And it's not really something you can compartmentalize. It can't just be work, ADHD coaching or neurodivergent coaching. It's your whole life. So it's big. I think that's what I want people to leave with.
And just to be clear, because I'm not sure we've emphasised it maybe enough that we should have done, that the knowing and the not knowing. The knowing is I've got ADHD, but the not knowing is what does it mean for me? How do I integrate it into everything else? Is that what we're talking about when you're talking about the knowing and not knowing?
Yeah, I'm glad you're trying to clarify that because I use this concept a lot. Not knowing is me for the first 4 decades of my life, right? So what was the impact of not knowing, not understanding? And what then happened as a result? And how did I understand myself? How did I talk to myself? What did I think about myself? What choices did I make because I didn't know? What messes did I get into? Or jobs did I leave? Or whatever. I mean, it can be a lot worse, right? I hold privilege. So there's that. And then the knowing is not just that I have it. The knowing is when you really start to integrate at depth with specificity. And then you can become empowered. Knowledge is power.
So there's quite a big gap there that I'm seeing as you're explaining that, between the not knowing, which is the part of my life when I had no idea or it wasn't confirmed that this was me.
Yeah.
Then either I've self-identified or I have received a diagnosis. And then there's still quite a gap till you get to the knowing, where it's really integrated and it's part of who you are and you're comfortable with it and you're clear about it.
Exactly that. And like supervision, the knowing is ongoing. It never ends. And I think this hinterland that you're hinting at is really, really important. And it's really messy. And some people never leave the hinterland.
Yeah. But I could also imagine that it's not as linear as we're describing it, that you could move into the knowing and then you discover some more unknowing and kind of go backwards and forwards. I can't imagine that it's static, Katie.
Absolutely. And the power of community, I think that comes out a little bit in the book, but it's definitely since writing the book, something I'm really thinking about is this idea of I'm not on my own. And when we link with others, and again, when we feel really, truly seen and understood for the first time, it's so transformational.
Well, thank you for letting us see you and hear you and your wisdom and the complexity of this space. I really appreciate it. I'm sure there's going to be lots of people who want to know more about the training, about the book and ways to work with you, Katie. How do they find you?
The best way is to go on our website, www.goldmindacademy.com.
We will put the links in, but yeah, so it's Gold Mind Academy.
Gold Mind Academy. I also have a TED Talk called ADHD Finding My Gold. So if you want to hear more of the story, that was kind of the beginning of all this.
And your book, ADHD Now What?
Yes.
Is either out or imminently out.
On Amazon, for sure.
Fabulous. Well, thanks so much. What a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, interviews, podcasts, and portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership, tools, models, and the latest industry trends to help you develop your coaching expertise.